Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. We go bi-institutional, or maybe just institutionalized, as we kick off this week's program. Should remind you, you can find out more about us at our website, tertiumquids.org, and you can listen to podcasts of previous programs, including our special from the 400th anniversary of the first meeting of the Virginia General Assembly, up on our YouTube channel. Search Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Our first guest this week is J. Pepper Bryars from the Alabama Policy Institute, senior fellow there. Pepper, thanks for joining us this week. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on your program.
Well, you are right in the center square of something that's dogging Virginia, and I hope you can share some of what's going on in Alabama as it regards to civil asset forfeiture. Virginia is struggling with it, can't seem to get out of its own way. We have big problems up here with law enforcement that is either tempted to fund their own operations by taking without convicting, and we see it happening even more so as time goes on. I've redoubled this in this call the governor has for common sense gun laws and red flag laws. My concern, beyond the obvious constitutionality of red flag laws, is that somebody in Virginia might confiscate somebody's firearms under a red flag and then just sell them the way they do with their cars and their houses, and sometimes just take all their money out of their bank accounts. So with those concerns in the air, catch us up on where Alabama is right now with civil asset forfeiture.
Right. Well, it's a tough issue because it plays against two fundamental, I guess you could call them, principles that we hold dear in America, especially in states like Alabama and Virginia, and that's private property rights, freedom in that respect, but also rule of law.
Right.
We want our law enforcement communities to be able to get the bad guys off the streets. And these civil asset forfeiture laws, which allow them to seize the property of a criminal, or perhaps even just a perceived criminal,
alleged,
and cripple them. I mean, the idea is that you have a guy, he's a known drug dealer, he's pulled over for maybe an expired tag, and he has $10,000 in cash in his glove box. The cops know, I mean, they're not stupid people, they're professionals, they know that that's drug money. Mm-hmm. So these laws were made back when we were trying to fight the cartels to say, hey, hurt them. You can't prove that there were involved in any drug activity, but you can hurt them by taking their money. Problem is that, who's watching the watchers? When you give somebody that authority, and by and large, it's exercised in a good way that actually helps us. But we hear stories of it being abused. And even if we don't hear stories of it being abused, there's just something icky about it, right? Mm-hmm. Something un-American. That we're just like, I just don't like the fact that the government can take my property without convicting me of a crime.
Pepper,
right?
And I don't know how the folks in Alabama are. Here in Virginia, I've found that the equilibrium comes with the idea that certainly hold it, put it in escrow until after court proceedings are done. All fine, well, and good. What we're finding, though, is instances where the law enforcement just confiscates it because the law says they can and uses it for their own purposes. Sometimes they turn the hot sports car into a pursuit vehicle for the state police, or they sell it and use the money for something else before there's ever a court trial. And I think one of the rule of law underpinnings is innocent until proven guilty, even if everyone and their grandmother knows somebody might be guilty of a crime. There is still the court proceeding that the Constitution guarantees you.
Right. So we've been struggling with that issue down here in Alabama for years. We don't like, there are many constitutional conservatives here who just don't like the idea of giving that power to law enforcement. But at the same time, we want our law enforcement officers to be able to do their jobs, and we generally trust them. They're part of our communities, and they have long said, look, guys, we do this on the up and up. This is a powerful tool for law enforcement. One of the largest, strongest advocates of it is our former senator from here, former Attorney General Jeff Sessions. So he talked a lot about that here. But after a few rounds in the legislature, we finally decided on a good idea would be say, okay, that old Russian proverb that Ronald Reagan said a lot, trust but verify. Okay, you're doing this on the up and up. Show us your homework. Show us what you're doing. So we got a law passed in our last legislative session that does that. It's called the Alabama Forfeiture Information Reporting Act. And it says that all property seized by a state, county, or municipal law enforcement agency for forfeiture shall be reported to the Uniform Crime Reporting System. That's going to work its way back through, and that allows watchdog organizations like the Alabama Policy Institute and others to see what's happening, what's going on. Because up till now, it's kind of been a rumor mill, right? You get a little bit of this information, a little bit of that information. All of this data is kept on court records, but we've got 26 circuit courts. No, I'm sorry, more than 40 circuit courts in the state of Alabama where these things could have been processed through. That's like trying to find a needle in 40 some odd haystacks. So it's just not possible. Yeah. So we got this through, and we're happy about that.
So now, what is the process? Is it a database searchable? Can the public see it, or is it something that needs to be, approached through Freedom of Information Act requests?
Well, we will see what the ultimate product looks like. But right now, they're going to have to. That data goes into a system. It's supposed to be a searchable website, and every year they have a reporting requirement to the governor, and they're supposed to make some of that report. Not quite sure, because we're giving the commission some latitude to figure this out. Right, it's the first time they've had to do it. They were willing. They want to meet us halfway on this, so we're going to let them try to figure out how this report is done. But they have a reporting requirement. It's supposed to be, publicly, reviewable. But listen to some of the information that it's going to contain in it. And this is what they have to put in there. It's not limited to it. The date of the seizure, the address of the seizure, the name of the law enforcement agency that took it, the type of property seized, the name of the person or entity that it was taken from, a description, here's a good one, of the underlying criminal activity. Right, okay, what was going on, right?
Yeah.
Any arrest, charge, anything related to the seizure, any civil case related to the seizure, what happened to the property, right? Where did it go?
Right.
Who got the property, right? Where, which law enforcement agency got it? And, going back from the Watergate era, what did Deep Throat say? Follow the money?
Yeah.
We're going to see where it goes. And any money collected by this civil asset forfeiture has to go into a separate line item in the budget of any agency that's awarded those assets. And anything that's funded from that has to be funded from that line item.
Okay.
So the idea is that we're going to introduce transparency into an issue that they say they've been doing on the up and up.
J. Pepper Bryars is Senior Fellow with the Alabama Policy Institute, on with us talking about their passage of a transparency law over their civil asset forfeitures. What would be the next step? Because I know that many of our listeners up here and our membership here in Virginia still get concerned under some of the underpinnings of guilt until proven innocent and that sort of thing. Does Alabama... are the law enforcement agencies allowed to liquidate these seizures before a judgment in the criminal case? Or are your laws a little different than Virginia's, where we have wiggle room in some cases, and we've seen assets liquidated before court proceedings have even begun?
I do not believe that that's possible in criminal or civil asset forfeiture. It has to be decided upon in one of our circuit courts, and that has been feedback from the law enforcement community is that, hey, this is all being done through established procedures, but it's just impossible to find. So the idea is that we're going to now get the information. Mm-hmm. We're going to get the data, and we're going to look at it. And hey, when, fundamental aspect of social science, when a human being knows he's being observed, it changes his behavior.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. Yes, I think we all remember that from our childhoods.
Right. So when you're watched, you tend to stand up straight and walk a little better.
Yeah.
And we're so that transparency, that will generate trust, and it doesn't get to the heart of that contradiction that I mentioned earlier between support for law enforcement going after the bad guys and our support for freedom and private property. It doesn't solve that, but at least it gets us. Hopefully, we'll be able to be talking about the same information, the same. We're not going to be talking about rumors. We're not going to be talking about speculation or anecdotes. We're going to be talking about data. And then we'll be able to have a conversation going forward. And if it is being abused, then the opponents from a philosophical view, the opponents of civil asset forfeiture will have more ammunition to get it taken down. But if it comes back that there's no abuse or that it's being done in a very regular, process-oriented way, and that there is means for people to fight this. Yeah. If they have, then it'll be a different situation. But I would encourage states out there that are having trouble with this. Sometimes we can get in these arguments where we're arguing in circles.
Oh yeah.
Maybe look at what we're doing and say, let's get the data. If it is on the up and up, as the law enforcement community says, then they should not have a problem with us seeing that homework.
You mentioned before we went to break, Jay Pepper, that we should sort of kind of look at how you've gone through this process. Look backwards a little bit. How long has you mentioned circular arguments about this. How long has this been going back and forth in your legislature, and what were some of the key points in getting this passed?
Well, we have it's probably the same thing in Virginia. It's an interesting coalition where you have constitutional conservatives, you have libertarians, and then you have some on the progressive side, who see this as, an overreach of law enforcement, penalizing poor and underrepresented minority communities. That's the point of the perspective that they're coming at this from. So when you look around the table of people who are worried about civil asset forfeiture, I mean, it's a motley crew of folks. And so it has been bubbling from different sectors for quite a while. But there's been a concerted effort in the past few years. The session before last, there was a rather strong bill that the Alabama Policy Institute and some others backed that would have, rolled back some of the abilities to do civil asset forfeiture, and in some cases, put rather large roadblocks. It cut pretty deep.
Yeah.
It was ultimately unsuccessful because of the law enforcement community that said, "Hey, wait a minute, guys, you're gonna hamper our ability to stop drug dealers, to fight crime, and our lawmakers and our people are sensitive to that, right? And one of the principles of conservatism is prudence, right? Let's take things more slowly this next session. Let's start by seeing if we can all talk about the same thing, all get the same data." And that was successful. And I might add that our law enforcement community began to voluntarily do that before this law was even officially passed. So they kind of, we kind of put into law what they said they were already willing to do. And I had conversations with, folks from the District Attorneys Association and said, "Hey, man, I hear you guys. I hear that this is how you can go after the bad guys, but you also have to know that you're talking about some practical things that you're trying to solve, and there's a lot of people that just think this is un-American."
Oh, sure. Well, let me talk about that coalition that you were talking about, because I think in Virginia we have struggled with reaching out to the black community. But when I've talked about it on my local radio shows, it has been a winner with listeners who would say, you know what, if you guys in the conservative movement talked more like this, there'd be more people in the black community, saying, you know what, I am conservative all along, because they see, when you have less, and your percentage of standing to lose more in an asset forfeiture, you want to know that somebody's standing up for that rule of law. And I think traditionally it passed down from grandparents who watched their businesses taken down in urban renewal projects and things like that here in Virginia. You see a lot of distrust for the authorities, police. It's been ginned up a lot more for I think fraudulent political reasons lately, but I think it is a winner for Virginia conservatives if we did a better job. Sounds like that's what you guys in Alabama did, is you've gotten sort of that coalition together and were able to get the black community or the underserved minority community, as you said, to really jump in and realize that this helps them as well.
Yeah, inch by inch, brother. That's how you tackle these things. And for every story we are able to, we hear about the abuse of civil asset forfeiture nationally, and you can just go on YouTube and type in, John Oliver civil asset forfeiture, and he did a hilarious segment about it. It is very funny. The law enforcement community is able to counter with 10 examples of how it targeted a for real, no kidding, everybody knows it, criminal drug dealer up to no good. And because of our other legal protections, the cops couldn't get him off the streets. The cops couldn't put a dent into his operation. So that's why it's so hard. And once you dig into it and talk to, law enforcement officials and cops, you see that, they're trying the best. They're trying to do the best we can. There's got some bad apples, but it's still. I've talked to a number of them and said, guys, I understand it, but it just sounds so un-American.
Oh, sure.
And let's just get all on the same page and see the data that comes back. Show us that you're doing it effectively. Show us that anybody that is accused wrongly is able to get their property back without much trouble, which I've heard nightmares. I've heard anecdotal stories of, nightmare stories about that,
sure,
about how hard it is for somebody who doesn't have the finances or at least the sophistication to navigate the labyrinth. And we get something back, right?
Yeah, we appoint them a defense attorney, but then once they try to get their property back, we need to appoint them an attorney there too. Sometimes
they're on their own, right? So it's hard, and it costs. Sometimes, most of these things are for $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 worth. I've heard that most of them are coming from that amount. You have to pay an attorney more than that to go try to get it back. So, I mean, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, man, that'll poke a hole in your budget big time.
Well, it's the same thing I tell the poor community about crime. I mean, it's if we have Commonwealth's attorneys instead of district attorneys here, but we have one candidate who's saying he's not going to prosecute anyone who steals anything under the umbrella of survival crime, including things like cars and food and things like that if they need them. And I said, generally speaking, we find that the poor community is the one that suffers the most under that kind of criminality, because you steal from a nurse who's living paycheck to paycheck and you steal her vehicle, you need it, but she needs it too. And it becomes sort of this the self-defeating cycle, and that's why you want to give law enforcement all the tools they need. And I appreciate you sharing, your insight into putting together this coalition. Talk about it. It sounds like it really only took one General Assembly session or one legislative session to get this done. Pepper, is that true, or did it take a couple of bites at the apple before you could get it?
It took several bites at the apple. Before the law enforcement community saw it as an issue that's not going to go away, right? I mean, a bill maybe get introduced and it gets defeated, then it gets introduced again, And now you got to keep going back at it, and that's how you get somebody to the negotiating table. And you have to stay at these things.
Right.
I mean, I don't know many things in government that are brought up in a single legislative session that are resolved
Right.
that are good. I mean, anything done fast, anything done quickly is usually bad.
Yeah.
You can have it right or you can have it right now. And, I prefer these things to move very slowly because I'm aware myself that I don't have all the information. I don't have all the perspective. I've not talked to enough people, inside of 1 year to tackle a problem this large, and it takes a long time. But it is important to understand that incrementalism is you can have a revolution and just rip out a law, or you can change it a little bit and then step back and see what happens.
Well, and as you said, now you have the buy-in of the law enforcement community because it sounds like they were at the table and listened to, and that's very important. J. Pepper Bryars, Senior Fellow at the Alabama Policy Institute. You can find out more about them at alabamapolicy.org. Pepper, thank you so much for joining us this week and sharing your insight on how you handled civil asset forfeiture there. Last most impressive, Roll Tide or War Eagle?
Roll Tide, brother, and good luck up there.
Talk to you soon.
All right, bye-bye.
Coming up next, we continue our institutionalization. Rick Larson, President and CEO of the Sutherland Institute, just broke down beautifully Mueller's testimony, such that it was, and he joins us next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.